Hello. We're going to go over lesson 9.2 for pre-algebra now, which talks about what we call relations. Now, relations are simply a set of ordered pairs. What's a set? A set's a group of anything. It could be a group of dinosaurs. It could be a group of Oreos. It could be a group of verbs. It could be a group of numbers. Now, normally in math, when we talk about a set, we talk about a group of numbers or a group of groups of numbers. A relation is a set of ordered pairs. Remember, an ordered pair is an x and a y coordinate. So remember, my first number in each parentheses is x. My second number in each parentheses is y. We call that an ordered pair. So when I have several ordered pairs together, we call that a relation. That's all it is. It's a group of ordered pairs. Now in a relation, I have a domain and a range. Now, when you think of the word domain, think dominate. Domain is the first, the x. It dominates. So the domain is always the first numbers of each ordered pairs. Now, the range is the y, or the second. Maybe you want to think in a range, home on the range, there's a lot of cattle with horns. A y looks like it has horns, therefore a range is all the y's or the second. Domain, all of the first numbers, the x, they dominate. The range, all of the y's or second. When I write out my domain and my range, there are two rules that are extremely important to remember. Rule number one, you must list each one only once. So, for example, I will underline each one of the numbers in my domain. The first number of each ordered pair. I have a 2, a -5, a 2, and a 5. Notice that I have 2 twice. But even though 2 occurs twice, I'm only going to write it once because I only list each number once. The second is I'm always going to put them in order from least to greatest. Always go from the smallest number in the domain to the biggest number. So even though 2 comes first here, -5 is smaller than 2. Remember, negative numbers are farther to the left on the number line, so they have a smaller value than positive numbers. So -5 is smaller. So notice when I listed my domain, even though 2 came first, I put -5 first because I want to list from least to greatest. Again, notice even though there are 2 2's, I only wrote 2 once, because I want to list each once. So my domain for relation P is -5, 2, and 5. That is my domain. What's my relation? My range are my second numbers. So in this case, my second numbers are 3, 4, 4, and -2. Again, I start with my smallest number, -2, then 3. Notice even though I have 2 4's, I only list it once. So my range is -2, 3, and 4. Now, what about graphing a domain or graphing a relation? Well, if I want to graph a relation, I need to graph every single one of these points. So, remember from last lesson, when we graph points, we always start at the origin. The origin, remember I have an x-axis. X is left to right. Very important to remember. X-axis, left to right. Y-axis is up and down. Always remember that. X, left to right. Y, up and down. For my x-axis, where my x and my y-axis cross, we call that the origin, because that is where I begin, the origin. And that is point 0, 0, because I'm not going left or right or up or down, so my origin is 0, 0. So if I want to graph my first ordered pair, 2, 3, I start at my origin. My first number is x. That means I'm going right or left. If it's positive, what do? I go right. So this is positive 2, so I'm going to go from the origin 2 to the right. My second number is 3. Remember, my second number is my y, up or down. Positive goes up. So 2, 3, I go to the right 2, up 3. So this right here is point 2, 3. How about negative 5, 4? Again, I start at my origin. Look at my first number. First number, is it left or right or up or down? It's going to be left or right. If it's negative, does it go left or right? Negative is going to go left. So starting at the origin, I'm going to go 5 to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Second number is positive 4. That means I go 4 up from this point. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is point negative 5, 4. 2, 4. Again, right 2, up 4. My last one, 5, negative 2. I start at the origin. My first number, I go right since it's positive. And then negative y means I go down 2. So this is negative 5, 2. I'm sorry, 5, negative 2. That is how I graph a relation. What about if they give me an equation? That gets really confusing, right? Actually, it's very simple. For example, let's say they give me the equation y equals 2x, and then they give me the domain. And they want me to write ordered pairs for this relation. Remember, my domain is my x or my y. It's my x. So it's already giving me all of my x's. So I'm going to write out, since it gives me 3 numbers, 3 ordered pairs, and it gives me an x for each ordered pairs. But how do I find my range? How do I find my y if it only gives me my x's? Well, it tells me my y is 2 times my x. So if I know my x, all I have to do is multiply by 2, and that will give me my y. So if my y is negative 2, I multiply negative 2 times 2. If my x is negative 2, I multiply 2 times negative 2, so my y is negative 4. If my x is 0, well, then I do 0 times 2. Well, that gives me 0. If my x is 5, well, then I do 5 times 2. That gives me 10. Now I have my relation, and again, I could graph that if I wanted to. It could give me a different equation. For example, if it gave me the equation 2 plus x. Well, now I'm going to take each one of my numbers, and instead of multiplying by 2, I'm going to add 2 to get my y. There's one less type of problem in 9.2 that we need to understand to make sure we do these problems correctly. And that's when they give me a graph that looks something like this. So notice they not only give me points, but they give me a line that goes between those 2 points. How in the world am I supposed to get a relation out of a line? Well, what this means is that I want every number that could possibly be on that line. So I can't just list a couple ordered pairs, because this is going to be an infinite amount of ordered pairs. Because it can be any decimal fraction between those 2 points. It's going to be an infinite amount, so I cannot just list ordered pairs. I have to write what is called an inequality. So, what does this mean? Well, let's start here with my x. So, notice this first point is to the left 1. Remember, left and right is on my x-axis, so that's my first point. If it's left, it's negative. So I know the first point is -1, and then it's down 1, 2, 3. That's my y. If it's down, it's negative, so it's -1, -3. This point at the other end is to the right 2, so +2, and then up 1, +1. Remember, right and left always go first, up and down always go second. To the right is positive, left is negative, up is positive, down is negative. So I know that this relation has all the points that are between -1, -3, and +2, +1. What that means is my x's can be any number. To the farthest to the left it can go, though, is -1. So I know that my x has to be either greater than or equal to -1. Notice there are no other numbers to the left of -1. So I start with my line that is farthest to the left. How far to the left does it go? Well, it goes all the way to -1, so I'm going to have x is greater than or equal to that. How far right does it go? Well, it goes all the way to +2, but it doesn't go farther than that, so x is less than or equal to +2. So anytime you have a line, it's always going to be x is greater than or equal to the smaller x, and x is less than or equal to the bigger x. What that means is all of the x's are going to be between -1 and +2. How about y's? Remember, y's are up and down. So what is the lowest my line goes? Well, the farthest down is -3. So I know that y has to be bigger or equal to -3. How far up does the line go? It goes all the way up to 1. So y can be less than or equal to 1. So I take my smaller y and I go all the way up to my bigger y. And that tells me what the domain and range of this line is. The domain can be anything as far left as -1 and as far right as +2. So it could be 0, it could be 0.1, it could be 1.1, it could be -1. -0.1, but it has to be between -1 and +2 for my x. My y has to be between -3 and +1. It can be any numbers between those. It's an infinite number of numbers, but it has to be between those two numbers. So a relation, to recap, is any set of ordered pairs. The first number, which is my x, when I take all of my first numbers, we call that the domain. The second number, which is my y, all of those second numbers we call the range.